in the fire service, there's 4 big common stressors. So I just want to go over those so you have some idea of things that are happening and how common they are, and how they end up impacting us. So, like I said, that survival brain is operating in the background and scanning the environment for threats at all times, and it's unconscious, so we don't notice what's going on. And this speaks to one mechanism of acute stress for emergency workers, is this life threat. And so another word for an acute stress is like a traumatic stress injury, because basically your brain, your survival brain, is perceiving it as very threatening. But so that's anytime we're proximal to death or serious injury, or we see someone experience it. So that survival brain, its job, remember, its survival strategy is to move away from threatening things. And it does that just through pattern recognition. When it sees that death or serious injury, it starts to encode those memories in a different way. And within that survival brain, it is hitting the oh shit button. Let's start recording in HD because this is really important and dangerous. We need to remember this event. Now, I didn't quite understand this because after I'd worked, I didn't learn this until I'd been in the fire service for 10 years. I've been a medic for 10 years, and I didn't feel this stress reaction. But what's different is running in the background, it's going on, but we don't feel it for a number of reasons. One is that we're trained and we have a job to do. So we have a place to put our focus, and our cognitive mind is going to be so focused on our tasks that we need to do. So in this patient care, that is, airway, breathing, circulation, rate, rhythm, and pressure, plug any holes that are leaking and all those things. What am I doing as a medic to see if I can turn around the outcome or positively impact the outcome on this medical call? And I'm not perceiving as much because I'm so focused on that. But the point of this is those things do add up, and it's conditioning our survival brain in different ways. We're seeing more and more threats. And so it can be, not all the time, but it can be that we become more reactive to these things, and they cause us more stress. Now, if you've been around for a while, or you have maybe a recollection of a particularly acute stressor, I don't want to traumatize you in the moment, but you might notice a reaction of, like, you're not really fond of going on a particular type of call like that. I work with a guy who was in the construction trades, and he really hated and was really uncomfortable with going on any kind of calls that involved like saw injuries to the hands. He just did not want to do that. That's that signal that his survival brain had encoded that really strongly, and then now he's got an aversion to that kind of call. And this is going to come up in the stress continuum. This is going to be one of the signs of stress injuries, this kind of call or specific aversion. Another type of injury is this that we commonly suffer is loss, and it's an injury that's involving grief. We just feel bad about things. And so clearly when we lose a loved one, that's a big deal. When we lose somebody that's close to us in our work, line of duty death or whatnot. So people, cherished people, things, pets, but very importantly, parts of oneself. So as we move through this career, we start to see the world differently, because we've seen all of the gnarly things that can happen in the world. We start to become more leery oftentimes as people. Maybe we're quicker to judge, and that's just been developed as a habit. And so oftentimes folks that have been in this career for 10, 15, 20 years, we're now feeling differently about the world than we did. We're not that, bright-eyed, maybe more naive or really optimistic, more upbeat person that we were when we first got hired. We feel like a heavier. And that's actually can be a sense of loss. It's like, I just don't see the world with as much maybe joy and vitality that I used to. So that can be something that we often, and it's pretty common to grieve in that. Down in the lower left corner, like a moral injury, which is just a case of inner conflict when we're doing something that doesn't align with our values. And so clearly if we're doing something like way outside of our values, if we have to, witness cruelty, or if we're put in a position that we feel like we have to do something illegal just to get along or stay with the crew, those are extreme examples. But also they can be little things where your values just aren't aligned with like what the job is asking you to do anymore. Let me give a couple of personal examples to help illustrate the concept. So moral injuries or inner conflict, they don't have to be a large problem in order to weigh on you. I would say, for example, I've been in the fire service working on 24 years now. And when we first joined the fire service, like I did, all the calls are great. They're really engaging. And then as you run more and more, like as natural for human beings, they become less fun, so to speak. So after you're there for a while, more and more calls may seem like nuisance calls, and that can definitely add up and weigh on a person. And so then you're feeling like, why am I doing this job? I wanted to do this job to run a bunch of fires and run a bunch of cardiac arrests or car wrecks, and those things just are not that common. So if we don't change kind of our values in a way to meet the circumstances, then that can cause some wear and tear on us. So for example, if we can reframe our job from as a firefighter from being I'm fighting structure fires and cutting people out of cars to I'm helping people, then there's a ton of opportunity to help people. So that's moving us on to this wear and tear, this fatigue injury. As you can read, that's just the accumulation of stress, whether chronic or acute, whether at our job or at home or any other thing, without sufficient rest and recovery. The reason why it's important to focus on that is because recovery and rest is the number one way in which we maintain our resilience and we build our skills. This is the proverbial burning the candle at both ends. We can certainly do it for a time, but it's not a long-lasting, effective approach. Speaking specifically about acute stress injuries, which are also known as traumatic stress injuries, and those would be the ones where we were seeing something that was very upsetting. This could definitely be running a repeated cardiac arrests in the form of the battalion chiefs, just that being proximal to these very emotionally distraught people can be an acute injury, or seeing something that's particularly upsetting to us, whether or not we actually really even notice it in the time. But so what's important is that those acute stress injuries are similar to burn injuries in as much as the longer the duration of exposure to that acute stressor, and the greater the magnitude, so to speak, of that acute stressor, the greater our injury. This is helpful to understand in that we can try and be purposeful about limiting the duration of our exposure and limiting our exposure to really intense things. So this might be if you are a battalion chief and you've run 3 cardiac arrests in that morning and a couple of the families are really upset and you're just feeling the pressure, this is a great time to reach out to a neighboring BC or the DC and let them know. Very importantly too, this is where we can help each other out as fellow responders. When you hear that one person has run a particularly high amount of calls in that way, and or if you're a company officer or a battalion chief and you know your crew has maybe not slept at all, they've been up all night for a number of reasons, they're going to be less resourced in dealing with more difficult calls. So that's not to say that we're going to at any point just say, nope, I'm absolutely not running that. But the more mindful we can be about this mechanism of injury, the more that we can do to prevent it and mitigate it. To build on that, there's 3 kind of subsets of acute stress injuries that are particularly impactful on us or injurious to us. So the first one is when people, all people, us or civilians or our coworkers, have a sense of helplessness, that there's just no way out of the situation. That leaves a big impact on our survival brain. Another way to say that might be that our survival brain senses that, neurocepts that as very dangerous. And so we can end up encoding our memories in a different way, and that can be a more traumatic call. So that's a greater mechanism of injury when we feel like we don't have any way out. And this is often can be in our personal life or our work life, and we'll also see this in the people that we're responding to. The second part of it is when that survival brain and we sense that we're alone, no one is coming to help. That is going to make the alarm response in the nervous system even larger. So make note of that. And we know this because in our lives, we've experienced that when someone shows up to help, things immediately feel better, or that when we can talk to someone close to us that decreases the amount of maybe felt stress or activation we have. And so the opposite of that is when we don't feel like we have any of those resources and that we can only handle this by ourselves. I think to some degree, this was a personal experience of mine. I've talked to other people, like when we go through divorce, we now feel maybe really isolated because of a number of things. Maybe we feel embarrassed or shame or like a failure, so we tend to self-isolate. And then in trying to work through this difficult process that many of us go through, we feel isolated, and it can make it more difficult. The reason why it's helpful to note this is when we need to be purposeful in understanding that our sense of isolation is just that, and to make sure we do our best to connect with others, even if, that could be a professional counselor or psychologist or peer team member or a peer. And then overwhelm. That is just too much stuff coming out. We don't feel totally helpless that there's no way out, but we just feel like there's too many things going on. Certainly we can feel that if we're first arriving on a particularly chaotic scene, that we've just got too much stuff to process, and that can be true. The human brain can only do so much, but that can also be in wider circumstances in our life. This could be when we have something going on at home, maybe we have an injury we're dealing with, and then because of that lack of rejuvenation and recovery, being in the orange or the red, we have an issue at work. That sense of overwhelm can just build up on it. How do we fix those things or address those things is a better way? We ask for help, basically, and on all of these, and we offer help. So we know that as we're looking at our peers, even our superiors and our subordinates, that when this is a normal reaction, and when we can try and mitigate any of these sensations, then we can help both ourselves out and that person that might be in that acutely stressful environment. And that approach is encapsulated in the concept of stress first aid and psych first aid, which is something that we as a department will be training on in the future. It's also on the backside of those 5x7 cards, the basic principles of it. But when we're approaching someone else, applying psychological first aid to them, first we want to make them feel safe, even if that is literally moving them to a place that's more safe, or protecting them from greater exposure, doing our best to help that person calm down. And a lot of that we do is not by telling them to calm down, but trying to bring a calm demeanor ourselves and just relating with them. Finally, giving them some sorts of connection, whether that's with us or if it's a family member who's witnessing an event of another family member. Cardiac arrest, for example, is find ways in which to connect them to people that they know. And this could even be pets. That's very helpful, or other family member or close friends. We want to look to give people some sense of their own ability to help themselves out. That's this term efficacy, so that they still can do things. They're not helpless in the world. And this could be collecting medications for someone that's sick, or even pointing out the fact that they did a good job noticing that their relative was maybe sick and they called 911, or if it was a fire situation, just pointing out the points at which those people responded effectively, or even responded at all, and made the situation a little bit better. And then hope is a little tricky one. This is Not so much something we can do all the time, but I think maybe a better way to explain it is that trying to convey to people that it's very tough right now in this moment, and things are going to change over time, um, and it won't feel as bad as it feels right now. Something that people often say is like, it's going to be okay, which can come off pretty tone deaf in certain situations. I know for me, when some people have told me that, when I've been maybe very activated or even emotionally distraught, and people are like, it'll be okay, what I want to say is an expletive to them. So be careful with that, but we just want to say that this is not going to be that bad. We're here for you. We're going to get through this. So look at that. I went through this whole slide early, but I'm not going to rehash it now. But we want to use that psych first aid basically to mitigate those feelings of no way out, no one's coming to help, and too much of my own through those concepts. There's some little cues on the back of that 5x7 card that's around the stations. There will be more. There will be infographics, and there's going to be some more education on this in the months to come. Okay, so that's it for stress injuries. We're going to be moving on to the stress continuum, um, just breaking it down. And then after that, we will be discussing concepts of resilience.